The last thing my grandmother heard before my mother's birthday party began was the sound of my sister revving the engine of a brand new silver Mercedes bought with stolen money. Money that came from selling Grandma's antique piano. The same piano she promised would belong to me. The same piano my family assumed she'd never ask about because hospice patients are supposed to fade quietly into the background while healthier people divide their belongings. But my grandmother didn't fade quietly. And when I finally told her what my parents had done, she picked up her phone, called a man named Harold, and said 7 words that changed my family forever. It's time to correct Richard's mistake. Before I tell you what happened at my mother's birthday party, and why 30 guests watched my father realize he never actually owned the house he'd bragged about for 10 years, take a second to like and subscribe if you love emotional family drama stories like this. And tell me honestly in the comments, would you expose your own family publicly after a betrayal like this? My name is Isabelle Carter. I'm 28 years old. I teach piano lessons to children 3 afternoons a week and work part-time at a local arts academy outside Philadelphia. According to my parents, that made me the unsuccessful daughter. My younger sister Olivia was the successful one, beautiful, outgoing, engaged to the son of my father's wealthiest business associate after only 8 months of dating. Everything in our family revolved around Olivia's future, her appearance, her relationships, her opportunities. Meanwhile, I became useful. That's what emotionally neglected daughters become eventually. Useful. Need someone to cancel plans and drive grandma to appointments? Call Isabelle. Need someone to organize paperwork? Call Isabelle. Need someone available because her career isn't demanding enough? Definitely Isabelle. I stopped fighting it years ago. Because when favoritism exists long enough inside a family, everyone adapts around it like furniture arranged around a crack in the floor. The call about Grandma Eleanor came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon after my final student left for the day. Dad didn't even say hello first. Your grandmother had another heart episode, he said flatly. They're moving her into hospice care. The world blurred slightly around me. What? She's stable for now, family meeting in an hour. Then he hung up, no comfort, no softness, just logistics. By the time I arrived at St. Catherine's Hospice Center, my parents and Olivia were already gathered near the waiting room coffee station. Dad stood with his arms crossed, looking irritated more than worried. Mom clutched her expensive leather purse tightly while whispering something to Olivia. And Olivia, she barely looked up from her phone. There you are, Dad said immediately. We need to divide responsibilities. Not how are you holding up. Not this must be hard, just tasks. Someone needs to visit your grandmother daily, he continued. Your mother and I have too much going on with the business. Olivia's occupied with the Harrison family situation. The Harrison family situation. Meaning Olivia's boyfriend's rich parents. Because apparently maintaining wealthy impressions mattered more than sitting beside your dying grandmother. Dad looked directly at me. Your schedule is flexible, you'll handle visits. Flexible. I wanted to explain that I taught 34 students every week, that I managed recital programs, that my work mattered too, but old habits are difficult to break. Okay, I said quietly. Mom nodded approvingly. At least one of our daughters understands responsibility. Olivia smiled faintly without looking up from her messages. And somehow that hurt more than direct cruelty, because indifference cuts differently than anger. I walked toward Grandma Eleanor's room alone. Behind me, I heard Mom whisper quietly, "She's useful for something at least." I kept walking, not because I didn't hear her. Because I'd spent 28 years pretending comments like that didn't matter. Grandma Eleanor's hospice room smelled like lavender and old paper. She insisted on both. They try making everything smell like chemicals here, she told me during my first visit. If I'm dying, I'll die surrounded by things I actually love. She was 76, sharp-minded, elegant, and somehow still intimidating even while connected to oxygen tubes. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited every evening after work. Sometimes we talked about music. Sometimes about her years performing in concert halls across the Northeast. Sometimes we just sat quietly together while rain tapped against the windows. And honestly, those evenings became the only peaceful part of my life. One night she reached for my hand while I adjusted her blanket. "Isabelle," she said softly, "I need you to promise me something." Anything? Her eyes moved toward the corner of the room where an old photograph rested beside the lamp. A younger version of her sitting beside a massive Steinway grand piano. My mother's piano, she whispered. The 1892 Steinway. I smiled faintly. I knew that piano better than I knew most people. I learned my first scales sitting beside Grandma on that bench at 7 years old. That piano carried every important memory of my childhood. It belongs to you, she said firmly. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. Grandma, I already told your parents in front of everyone. Her voice sharpened slightly. That piano is yours. I remembered the dinner instantly, Dad looking annoyed, Mom exchanging a glance with Olivia, my sister muttering, "It's just old furniture." But Grandma ignored all of them. "You understand what that piano means," she whispered now. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'll take care of it." A slow smile crossed her face. "I know you will." Then her expression changed slightly. Not sadness, something else. The kind of look people get when they already see a storm coming before everyone else notices the clouds. "There are some lessons," she said quietly. "People only learn after they lose something they thought belonged to them." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. 2 weeks later, I walked into her empty living room and realized my family had already started stealing. The living room looked wrong the second I walked inside. At first, I couldn't understand why. Everything else seemed normal. The lace curtains, Grandma's antique lamp glowing softly near the bookshelf, the faint scent of lavender still lingering in the air. But then my eyes moved toward the far corner beside the bay windows and my stomach dropped. The Steinway was gone. I stopped breathing for a second. For 21 years, that piano sat in the exact same place. Black polished wood, ivory keys slightly yellowed with age, tiny scratch near the left pedal where I accidentally dropped a metronome at 12 years old. It was the emotional center of Grandma's house. And now there was only an empty rectangle pressed into the carpet, like a ghost had been ripped out of the room. My hands started shaking instantly. No, I crossed the living room too quickly, almost slipping on the hardwood floor. Maybe Grandma moved it. Maybe it was being repaired. Maybe, but deep down, I already knew. Because people who feel entitled to other people's belongings don't wait for permission once they think time is running out. I pulled out my phone immediately and called Mom. She answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "What? Where's Grandma's piano?" Silence. "Then your father handled it." Cold spread through my chest. "Handled it how?" "Adult matters, Isabelle, don't start drama." "Where is the piano?" Another pause, longer this time, then finally. "It was sold." The room tilted. "You sold Grandma's piano?" "Lower your voice." "She said it was mine." Mom sighed heavily like I was being unreasonable. "Your grandmother is dying, Isabelle. She doesn't need a giant piano anymore." I genuinely couldn't process what I was hearing. "That wasn't yours to sell. Honestly, what were you even planning to do with it?" Mom snapped. "You live in a tiny apartment teaching beginner piano lessons." Every word landed exactly where she intended. Small, unimportant, unsuccessful, I swallowed hard. "Does Grandma know?" Silence again. And suddenly I had my answer. "You didn't tell her? She's in hospice," Mom hissed. "Do you really want to upset a dying woman over an object?" An object. The same piano Grandma's mother brought from Vienna in 1892. The same piano Grandma built her entire concert career around. The same piano she trusted me to protect. It wasn't an object to her. Mom's tone hardened instantly. "If you tell her and something happens because of the stress, that will be on you." There it was. The emotional manipulation, my mother's favorite weapon, make me responsible for everyone else's choices, everyone else's emotions, everyone else's damage. I closed my eyes tightly. "What did you even sell it for?" $95,000. $95,000. My chest tightened painfully because suddenly I understood exactly what happened. Olivia. "Mom, we needed to help your sister make the right impression on Daniel's family." Of course, everything always circled back to Olivia's future. I hung up before she could continue. Then stood alone in Grandma's empty living room, staring at the space where the piano used to be. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. And for the first time in years, something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly, quietly, like the moment a thread finally snaps after holding too much tension for too long. That evening, I drove directly to my parents' house. Dad opened the front door holding a glass of bourbon. Annoyance crossed his face immediately. "You could have called." "The piano," he barely reacted. "What about it?" "You sold it." Yes, no guilt, no hesitation, nothing. Like selling Grandma's most treasured possession meant absolutely nothing to him. "She wanted me to have it?" Dad took a slow sip of his drink. "Your grandmother isn't thinking clearly anymore." Rage flashed hot through my chest. "She was perfectly clear." "She's emotional," Mom interrupted, appearing behind him. "And frankly, Isabelle, you don't need a $95,000 piano." Then I heard it, the electronic chirp of car keys. Olivia walked into the hallway grinning brightly, swinging a Mercedes keychain around her finger. A brand new silver Mercedes sat glowing in the driveway behind her, red bow still attached. My stomach dropped instantly. "You used Grandma's piano money to buy her a car?" Dad shrugged casually. "Olivia needs to present herself properly around the Harrisons." Olivia smirked. "Daniel's family notices things like that?" I stared at all three of them, and suddenly every moment of favoritism throughout my entire life replayed itself at once. The birthday gifts, the tuition differences, the excuses, the emotional neglect disguised as practicality. Olivia noticed my expression and rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, Isabelle, don't be jealous." Jealous. Interesting word for grief. "That piano was supposed to be mine." "And what exactly would you do with it?" Mom asked coldly. "You don't perform, you teach children scales." The cruelty felt almost casual now, practiced, comfortable. Because people who repeatedly diminish someone eventually stop noticing they're doing it. I looked directly at Dad. "Does Grandma know what you did?" For the first time all evening, he hesitated. Small but noticeable, Mom stepped forward immediately. "She does not need unnecessary stress in her condition." Meaning, no, I nodded slowly, then said the one sentence they clearly never expected from me. "I'm telling her tomorrow." Mom's face went pale instantly. Dad's jaw tightened, and Olivia stopped smiling. That was the first time in my life my parents looked genuinely afraid of me, not angry, not disappointed, afraid. Because people who depend on silence panic the moment someone finally stops cooperating. Mom recovered first. "Absolutely not." Her voice cracked sharply through the foyer. "You are not upsetting your grandmother during her final weeks over some sentimental misunderstanding." Sentimental misunderstanding. Interesting way to describe stealing a $95,000 family heirloom. Dad stepped forward slowly. "Isabelle," he said in the calm voice he used whenever he wanted control back, "you're emotional right now." No, I was awake, and apparently that frightened them more. "She trusted me with that piano?" Dad sighed heavily like I was exhausting him. "Your grandmother trusted this family to make practical decisions." Olivia leaned against the hallway wall, casually twirling the Mercedes keys. "Honestly, she probably won't even remember once you tell her." That sentence hit harder than everything else somehow. Because deep down, they already decided Grandma Eleanor stopped mattering as a person. To them, hospice meant irrelevant. Temporary, almost gone. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. They weren't waiting for Grandma to die emotionally. They already buried her. I looked directly at Olivia. She remembered every chop-in piece she performed in 1987 last week. Olivia rolled her eyes. "Cool." Dad's expression hardened slightly. "You're not telling her." The command in his voice would have worked on me a year ago. Maybe even a month ago, but standing there watching Olivia grin beside a car bought with Grandma's stolen piano, something inside me finally detached. "No," I answered quietly. "I am." Mom stepped closer instantly. "If something happens to her because of stress, it happened because you sold her piano." Silence exploded across the foyer, because manipulative people survive by controlling blame. And for the first time, I handed it back where it belonged. Dad's face darkened immediately. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said calmly. "You're just finally hearing this out loud." I turned toward the front door before any of them could answer, then paused. "One more thing." They looked at me silently. "If Grandma asks where the money went," my eyes moved toward Olivia's Mercedes keys. "I'm telling her that too." I left before they could respond. But even from outside, I heard Mom shouting my name. Not emotionally, desperately. because suddenly they understood something important. Grandma Eleanor still had power. And if she found out the truth, there was no guarantee she'd leave things the way they were. That night, I barely slept. My tiny apartment felt smaller than usual. One bedroom, second-hand furniture. A keyboard pressed beside the wall because I couldn't afford a real piano. The kind of life my parents constantly mocked without directly mocking. Subtle comments, little jokes. Oh, your place is cozy? You're still teaching beginner lessons? Music isn't exactly stable long-term. But sitting alone in that apartment staring at Grandma's old concert photograph, I realized something painful. I spent 28 years shrinking myself to make cruel people comfortable, and all it gave me was loneliness. Around 2 a.m., I made tea and sat cross-legged on my couch thinking about every moment I stayed quiet. Every insult ignored, every boundary crossed, every excuse I made for them. Family is complicated. Your parents mean well. Olivia doesn't realize how spoiled she sounds. But eventually excuses become participation. And suddenly I understood something Grandma taught me years earlier. Silence protects the person causing harm, never the person receiving it. By sunrise, my decision was final. Grandma deserved the truth. The next morning, I arrived at hospice before work. Grandma Eleanor sat propped against pillows watching pale sunlight spill across the windows. "You look exhausted," she observed immediately. "I didn't sleep." Her eyes sharpened. "What happened?" I sat beside her slowly and took her hand. Her skin felt thinner than I remembered, cool, fragile, but her gaze stayed fierce. "Grandma," my throat tightened unexpectedly. "I need to tell you something." She studied my face for 2 seconds, then nodded once. "Tell me." So I did everything: the empty living room, the phone call, the $95,000, Olivia's Mercedes. Dad calling it a practical decision, Mom blaming me for potentially upsetting her. Every word. I expected tears, shock, anger, maybe even heartbreak. Instead, Grandma Eleanor simply closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. Not surprised. Not devastated, just tired, like someone watching a prediction finally come true. "You knew," I whispered. Her eyes opened again slowly. "I know my son." The sadness in her voice hurt worse than rage would have. "I kept hoping Richard would become a better man," she continued softly. "But hope and reality aren't always friends." I stared at her. "You're not angry?" "Oh, sweetheart." A faint smile crossed her face. "Anger requires surprise?" That sentence sat heavily between us, because suddenly I realized this betrayal didn't begin with the piano. It began years ago, maybe decades. Grandma reached toward the bedside table carefully. "Hand me my phone." Confused, I passed it to her. She scrolled through contacts slowly until she found a name, then pressed call. The line rang twice. A man answered. "Harold Jennings speaking." Grandma's voice became unexpectedly sharp. "It's time." Silence. Then the man answered calmly, "I understand." "Sunday," Grandma continued. "Diane's birthday party." Another pause. "I'll prepare everything." Grandma ended the call and set the phone down carefully. I stared at her. "Who's Harold?" A small knowing smile appeared on her face. "My attorney." My stomach tightened. "You have an attorney?" "Oh, Isabelle." Her eyes glimmered faintly. "I have many things your parents don't know about." Then she squeezed my hand gently. "And Sunday," she whispered, "they're finally going to learn that too." I spent the next 3 days in a constant state of nervous anticipation, not fear exactly, something sharper. Like standing on train tracks, hearing something massive approaching in the distance but not yet seeing it. Because Grandma Eleanor changed after that phone call. Not physically. She still looked fragile beneath hospice blankets. Still tired. Still dying, but emotionally, something inside her seemed settled now, resolved. And honestly, that terrified me a little. On Friday afternoon, she finally explained part of the truth. "Your father believes he understands ownership," she said quietly while I adjusted flowers beside her window. "But possession and ownership are very different things." I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, she asked, "Do you know who legally owns your parents' house?" I blinked. "They do." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Is that what they told you?" Cold spread slowly through my stomach. "Grandma," she leaned back against the pillows carefully. "Your grandfather left that property to me when he died." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "I allowed Richard and Diane to live there after their financial problems 10 years ago." aloud. Not gifted, my pulse quickened instantly. You mean I never transferred ownership? The room went completely still. For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard her. That's impossible. No, her voice stayed calm. What's impossible is how long your parents convinced themselves generosity meant entitlement. My mind raced instantly. 10 years. 10 years Dad bragged about that house, hosted business dinners there, lectured me about building assets, mocked my apartment while standing inside a home he didn't actually own. The irony almost made me dizzy. Why didn't you tell anyone? Grandma looked toward the window thoughtfully. Because I was watching. Watching, the word echoed strangely. I wanted to believe my son would eventually become someone trustworthy with responsibility. Sadness flickered across her face. Instead, he sold my mother's piano to buy a Mercedes. A long silence settled between us. Then finally, what happened Sunday? A small smile touched her lips again. Consequences. That night, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every memory suddenly looked different through this new reality. Dad's confidence, Mom's superiority, Olivia acting like wealth made her important. None of it actually belonged to them. They built their identity on borrowed things. Borrowed money, borrowed status, borrowed property, and now Grandma planned to expose all of it publicly. Saturday morning, Harold Jennings called me personally. His voice sounded calm, measured, professional in a way that instantly reassured me. Your grandmother asked me to meet with you before tomorrow. 3 hours later, I sat inside an old law office outside Philadelphia surrounded by shelves of leather-bound legal books. Harold Jennings looked exactly like someone trusted with dangerous family secrets for 30 years. Silver hair, gold-rimmed glasses, precise movements. Nothing about him felt dramatic, which somehow made him more intimidating. Your grandmother is an extraordinarily intelligent woman, he said after we sat down, and very patient. I swallowed carefully. She planned all this for 5 years. 5 years, the number stunned me. Harold opened a folder slowly. Inside sat property deeds, trust documents, financial records, everything organized perfectly. The house your parents live in remains solely under Eleanor Whitmore's ownership, he explained. No transfer was ever executed. I stared at the deed, Grandma's name printed clearly across the document. This entire time, yes, I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They really believed it was theirs. Harold adjusted his glasses calmly. Your father believed many things because he stopped verifying them long ago. Then he slid another document toward me, a trust agreement. My name appeared across the bottom. Beneficiary, Isabelle Marie Carter. My heartbeat stumbled. What is this? 5 years ago, your grandmother created a protected trust containing all major assets under her control. I looked up slowly. The house. My chest tightened instantly, and the piano, Harold's expression darkened slightly. Yes, a horrible realization hit me. The piano sale was unauthorized disposal of trust property. I stared at him, meaning legally Dad didn't just betray Grandma emotionally. He committed fraud. Can he get in trouble? Harold folded his hands carefully. Very serious trouble if your grandmother chooses full legal action. Silence swallowed the room, then quietly, almost afraid to ask. Why me? Harold's expression softened for the first time. Because your grandmother spent years watching how this family treated you. Emotion burned suddenly behind my eyes. She said I understood the piano. She said you understood people. That hurt unexpectedly, because nobody in my family ever described me kindly without needing something attached. Harold continued. Your grandmother told me something years ago. He glanced down at the paperwork briefly. The quiet children usually carry the deepest loyalty, but loyalty without protection becomes sacrifice. Tears blurred my vision instantly. She noticed all of it, all of it. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then finally, what happens tomorrow? Harold closed the folder carefully. Tomorrow your parents learn the difference between pretending to own power, his eyes met mine steadily, and actually having it. Sunday arrived cold and bright. The kind of winter morning where everything feels unnaturally sharp. Sharp sunlight, sharp wind, sharp nerves. I sat in my car outside Grandma Eleanor's house gripping the steering wheel while guests' vehicles lined both sides of the street. 30 people at least, family, friends, neighbors, business associates, the Harrisons. Everyone arriving to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday inside a house my parents spent 10 years pretending belonged to them. And none of them had any idea what was about to happen. I checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. Navy blue dress, pearl earrings Grandma gave me on my 21st birthday, hair pinned neatly back, armor disguised as elegance. My phone buzzed softly, a message from Grandma. "Be brave, sweetheart." That nearly broke me, because even now, while dying, she worried about protecting me emotionally. I swallowed hard and stepped out of the car. The house looked beautiful from the outside. Warm golden lights glowed through the windows. Music drifted softly from inside. Someone hung a giant Happy 60THDIANE banner across the porch. Perfect image, perfect illusion. Exactly the kind of thing my parents cared about most. The moment I entered, Mom spotted me from across the foyer. Her smile tightened immediately, not welcoming, calculating. "You came," interesting phrasing considering she invited me herself. I said I would. Her eyes flicked toward Harold Jennings standing quietly near the fireplace holding a leather briefcase. For the first time all evening, my mother looked genuinely unsettled. Dad approached seconds later, already performing his usual charming host routine for nearby guests. "There's our music teacher," he joked loudly to a couple beside him. "Always late." Polite laughter. I forced a small smile, because suddenly I saw everything differently now, every joke, every dismissal. Every subtle humiliation disguised as humor. Dad needed an audience almost as much as he needed control. And tonight, both were about to disappear. Olivia swept into the foyer moments later wearing a cream-colored designer dress and a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. "Isabelle," she said sweetly, "did you see the Mercedes outside?" I stared at her calmly. "The one bought with Grandma's piano." Her smile faltered instantly. Mom stepped between us immediately. "Not tonight." Interesting. Because suddenly nobody wanted conflict in public anymore. The same people who humiliated me privately for years suddenly cared deeply about appearances. The living room filled steadily over the next hour. Champagne glasses clinked. Business conversations drifted through the air. Laughter echoed around the room. And all I could think about was the empty corner where Grandma's Steinway used to stand. They placed a giant decorative plant there instead. Like greenery could hide theft. Aunt Margaret arrived around 6:30 and hugged me tightly. "She's ready," she whispered quietly. I nodded once. Nerves twisted painfully in my stomach. Then suddenly Dad clinked a spoon against his wine glass. The room quieted immediately. Of course he loved speeches. Attention flowed toward him naturally like sunlight toward mirrors. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he announced warmly. "We're celebrating 60 incredible years of my beautiful wife Diane." Applause filled the room. Mom smiled proudly beside him. And Dad continued dramatically, "We also have exciting family news to celebrate." My stomach dropped instantly. Olivia grinned. Of course, this was about her too. Dad motioned toward the front windows. "Everyone should step outside for a moment." The crowd followed eagerly. And there sat the silver Mercedes glowing beneath the porch lights with a massive red bow across the hood. Guests gasped admiringly. Olivia practically vibrated with excitement. Dad raised his glass proudly. "A gift for our daughter's future," he announced. "Made possible through Eleanor's generosity." Liar, the words screamed inside my head. "She wanted Olivia to have every opportunity," Mom added smoothly. More lies, and the worst part? People believed them because manipulative families survive through presentation. One woman near me whispered quietly, "Wasn't there some antique piano involved?" Her husband shrugged. "I guess the grandmother changed her mind." "No, she didn't." Dad lifted the Mercedes keys dramatically and handed them to Olivia while guests applauded. Then Olivia turned toward me smiling sweetly. "Don't worry, Isabelle," she laughed. "Maybe Grandma will leave you her old sheet music collection." Scattered laughter followed. My face burned instantly. And suddenly I realized something devastating. They truly believed they won. They thought Grandma was too weak, too sick, too close to death to stop them. Then behind me, I heard the soft click of a briefcase opening. The sound sliced through the party noise strangely sharply. I turned. Harold Jennings stood near the foyer calmly removing a stack of documents. And across the room, my father finally noticed him clearly. The color drained from Dad's face immediately. For one long second, nobody moved. Dad stood frozen near the Mercedes with a champagne glass still raised halfway in the air. Mom's smile disappeared instantly. And Olivia. She looked confused more than worried, because unlike my parents, she still didn't fully understand what was happening. Harold Jennings closed his briefcase calmly and stepped toward the center of the living room. Measured movements. Quiet confidence, the kind that only comes from people holding absolute proof. My apologies for interrupting the celebration, he said smoothly. Every conversation stopped. 30 people turned toward him at once. My name is Harold Jennings. He adjusted his glasses slightly. I'm Eleanor Whitmore's attorney. The silence that followed felt physical, heavy, sharp, dangerous. Dad recovered first. Barely. Mother has an attorney? Interesting question considering Harold later told me he'd represented Grandpa's estate for 3 decades. Meaning Dad simply never bothered paying attention unless money directly affected him. 30 years now, Harold answered politely. Your mother preferred privacy regarding financial matters. Mom stepped forward quickly. This really isn't the time. Oh, Harold said calmly. According to Eleanor, this is exactly the time. That sentence changed the entire room. Because suddenly guests realized something important. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Harold placed several documents carefully onto the dining room table. I'm here today because Eleanor Whitmore requested clarification regarding several recent misunderstandings involving her estate. Dad set his champagne glass down too hard. I think this conversation should happen privately. Unfortunately, Harold replied smoothly, the piano sale was announced publicly. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The Harrisons exchanged glances near the fireplace. And Olivia finally stopped smiling completely. Harold lifted the first document. Let's begin with the property itself. My pulse quickened instantly. Dad's jaw tightened visibly. This house, Harold continued clearly, located at 214 Willow Creek Lane, remains legally and solely owned by Eleanor Whitmore. The room exploded into whispers immediately. Mom actually laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. Harold calmly held up the deed. Signed, stamped. Official, Grandma Eleanor Whitmore, only her name, no transfer, no amendment, no Richard Thompson, no Diane Thompson, nothing. Dad's face went pale. We've lived here for 10 years. Yes, Harold answered politely. As permitted residents, not owners. The distinction landed like shattered glass across the room. I watched realization spread slowly through guests' expressions. Neighbors, business partners, family friends, everyone suddenly recalculating every story Dad ever told about success and property ownership. Harold continued. Eleanor allowed Richard and Diane Thompson to occupy this property following financial difficulties after the recession. Murmurs spread louder now, because suddenly the perfect wealthy family image looked very different, not successful. Dependent, borrowed. Dad stepped forward sharply. Mother promised this house would become ours eventually. Harold tilted his head slightly. Then I assume you have signed documentation confirming that? Silence. Of course he didn't. Because entitlement always assumes paperwork isn't necessary. Mom crossed her arms tightly. We renovated this house. Without ownership authorization, Harold corrected calmly. You can't seriously humiliate us like this in front of everyone, Dad snapped. Harold's expression never changed. Actually, Richard, Eleanor believes public actions deserve public accountability. That sentence nearly knocked the air from my lungs. Because suddenly I heard Grandma's voice inside every word, calm, sharp. Unapologetic, Olivia grabbed Dad's arm. Wait, her voice shook slightly. What does this even mean? Harold looked toward her kindly. It means your grandmother permitted your family to live here out of generosity. A brief pause. Not inheritance. The Harrisons looked deeply uncomfortable now. Daniel Harrison avoided eye contact with Olivia entirely. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched my sister realize charm and favoritism couldn't save her from reality. Dad pointed toward Harold furiously. This is manipulation. No, Harold answered quietly. This is documentation. Then he opened another folder, and suddenly the room became even colder. Now, he continued, we should discuss the unauthorized liquidation of protected trust assets. Mom's face drained instantly. Dad looked genuinely frightened now, not embarrassed, terrified. What trust? Olivia whispered. Harold slowly lifted a thick legal document. 5 years ago, Eleanor Whitmore established a protected estate trust to safeguard specific assets from financial misconduct. Financial misconduct. The phrase sliced through the room beautifully, sharp enough to sound professional, personal enough to sound devastating. Harold's eyes moved directly toward me. The sole beneficiary of that trust is Isabelle Marie Carter. Complete silence. Then Olivia spoke first. What? Dad exploded immediately afterward. This is insane. No, Harold answered calmly. It's legally binding. I stood completely still while the room spun emotionally around me. Because even though I already knew, hearing it publicly felt different. Real, final, Harold continued carefully. The trust contains Eleanor Whitmore's primary financial accounts. This property, his eyes shifted briefly toward the empty corner of the room. And the 1892 Steinway grand piano sold 2 weeks ago without authorization. Gasps spread across the living room instantly. Real ones. Shocked, horrified, Dad's voice cracked. She manipulated my mother? No, Harold replied softly. She simply prepared for the possibility that her son might eventually betray her. That sentence destroyed him more than anything else. Because suddenly every person in that room understood the truth. Grandma Eleanor expected this. She planned for it, and worst of all, she was right. The room stayed silent for several seconds after Harold finished speaking. Not polite silence, stunned silence. The kind that happens when an entire illusion collapses publicly in real time. Dad looked like he physically couldn't breathe. Mom gripped the edge of the dining table so tightly her knuckles turned white. And Olivia, she stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. Because for the first time in our lives, I wasn't standing quietly in the background while everyone else controlled the story. Harold calmly adjusted the trust documents, then continued. Since the Steinway piano was protected under the trust, its sale constitutes unauthorized disposal of trust property. Dad found his voice again. This is absurd. No, Harold answered softly. It's fraud. That word hit the room like shattered glass. Fraud, not misunderstanding, not family conflict. Fraud. The Harrisons stepped farther away from my family instantly. Daniel looked deeply uncomfortable now, and his father, cold, calculating, the expression of a businessman realizing he attached himself to the wrong people. Mom's voice cracked sharply. We sold one piano. An asset legally designated to another beneficiary, Harold corrected calmly. Olivia looked toward Dad desperately. What does that mean? Harold's tone remained perfectly even. It means the $95,000 obtained through the piano sale must be returned to the trust. Complete panic flashed across Olivia's face. My car? Harold nodded slightly toward the Mercedes visible through the front windows. The funds used to purchase that vehicle were never legally yours. Olivia burst into tears instantly. No, Dad stepped forward aggressively. You can't humiliate my family like this over a piano. And suddenly, something inside me snapped permanently. Over a piano, I repeated quietly. Everyone turned toward me. I stepped forward slowly into the center of the room. That piano was Grandma's entire life. My voice stayed calm somehow. Her mother brought it from Vienna in 1892. She built her career playing on it. She trusted me to protect it. Dad looked furious now. You poisoned her against us. No, I answered immediately. She already knew who you were. Silence crashed across the room again, because deep down, everyone understood that was true. Mom pointed at me with shaking hands. You've always been jealous of Olivia. The old version of me would have cried hearing that. Apologized maybe, tried explaining myself, but not anymore. I'm not jealous, I said softly. I'm exhausted. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Because suddenly 30 people watched the family dynamic nobody ever acknowledged finally surface publicly. The invisible daughter, the golden child, the parents who built love around usefulness. I looked directly at Mom. You called me useful the day Grandma entered hospice. Her face drained instantly. Aunt Margaret looked horrified. Dad interrupted quickly. Don't do this here. Why? I asked calmly. You sold Grandma's piano publicly. You announced Olivia's Mercedes publicly. Olivia cried harder beside the staircase. And honestly, For the first time in years, I felt sorry for her because favoritism destroys the favorite too eventually. It teaches them love is earned through image and performance instead of character. Harold opened one final document. There is also the matter of residency. Dad froze completely. What? Per Eleanor Whitmore's instruction, Richard and Diane Thompson will be offered a formal 12-month lease agreement following her passing. Mom stared blankly. A lease? Yes. In our own home. Harold's expression remained calm. In Eleanor Whitmore's home? That sentence finished it. Dad collapsed into the nearest chair like someone physically cut the strings holding him upright. Everything he built his identity around vanished in less than 20 minutes. The house. The status, the image, the control, all borrowed, all temporary, all gone. Guests began leaving slowly afterward. Quiet whispers, awkward goodbyes. Nobody wanted to remain near the wreckage. The Harrisons disappeared first. Daniel didn't even say goodbye to Olivia. Interesting how quickly people abandon relationships once status disappears. Aunt Margaret stayed beside me quietly squeezing my hand. You did the right thing, she whispered, did I? Honestly, I still wasn't sure. Because exposing truth publicly feels ugly even when necessary. But silence would have protected the wrong people again, and I was finally done sacrificing myself for family comfort. About an hour later, the house emptied completely. The birthday cake sat untouched on the dining table. The giant banner drooped sadly across the doorway, and the Mercedes still gleamed outside like a monument to arrogance. Harold packed his documents carefully. Your grandmother predicted you'd handle this with grace, he told me quietly. I looked toward my parents across the room, Mom crying silently, Dad staring blankly at the floor. I don't feel graceful. No, Harold answered softly. You feel free. That nearly broke me because he was right. 3 weeks later, Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully with my hand in hers. Before she closed her eyes for the final time, she whispered one sentence. You finally stopped apologizing for existing. I cried harder than I ever had in my life, not because she was leaving. Because for the first time, someone fully saw me before they did. 6 months later, I moved into Grandma's house permanently. I used part of the returned piano money to buy a beautiful Yamaha grand piano, not the Steinway. Nothing could replace that, but healing isn't about replacing what was stolen, it's about building something honest afterward. Mom and Dad moved into a small condo across town after their lease ended. Dad's business shrank badly after the birthday party fallout. Olivia started therapy, and 8 months later she called me unexpectedly. I think being the favorite ruined me, she whispered. That was the first honest thing she'd ever said to me. We're still rebuilding slowly, carefully, but some wounds don't disappear completely. They just stop controlling your life. Tonight, I'm sitting beside my piano with the windows open while spring rain taps softly against the garden outside. Grandma's lavender still blooms beside the porch. The house smells peaceful again. And for the first time in my life, so do I. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional family drama stories. And tell me honestly in the comments, would you have exposed your family publicly too, or stayed silent to keep the peace?